I'm Rob Hansen, creator of Chetwynd, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's June 4th, 2021. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Rob Hansen about Chetwynd. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. Rob is a creator, designer, and illustrator based in Halifax, Nova Scotia. His current project is Chetwynd, described as what if Bigfoot, werewolf, and vampire mythology is all based on one actual creature? Enter Vamp Squatch. He's 400 pounds of blood-sucking terror, and he appears to be under the control of a 14-year-old girl named Wendy. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Rob Hansen about Chetwynd. So, Rob Hansen, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure, John. It's nice to talk to you.
Appreciate your time. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask creators about their first comic books. I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Okay, so I'm 55 years old. So the first one that I read, well, the one that I remember was a Gold Key Tarzan book.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And don't really remember reading it. What I remember is trying to draw Tarzan from it.
Oh, wow.
That's
cool.
And I was like, 5 or 6 or something. I have no idea where it came from. But that's the one that I remember. But the one that I still have that I read was a really old Spider-Man one where the Prowler was introduced.
Oh.
And then and that's another really old, and I still have that. It's torn up because
Sure.
Did all kinds of things to it. But that's what I mean. I loved Spider-Man, and it's that stuff just got me going, right. But it was, my interest in comics comes from like Magnus Robot Fighter and early Conan, and then heavy metal and all that stuff, right. So it was. Yeah. It's been there for almost as long as I can remember, I guess.
That's great. Good. Well, lots of good influences there. Certainly Spider-Man and Prowler and that sort of thing, and Tarzan. But what about your work today? What influences your work today?
Well, the stuff that I do, like I've only got 2 issues out right now, but. And that's, I think making comics is all about confidence and just finding out where you fit in that world and how to, just finishing something and then moving on to the next thing. And so for me, it's a kind of a broad range of things because, like the stuff I read, like I love Umbrella Academy and Black Hammer, like that stuff's just awesome. And, what else? Kill or Be Killed. I really like that. There's Mike Mignola's stuff, James Herron's stuff. There's so many fantastic artists out there and writers, and yeah, most of the stuff that I think that influences me is probably more like horror movies, maybe, I guess.
Sure.
In a way, like the writing behind Umbrella Academy definitely influences me. The artwork, not so much probably, but Mignola's artwork does influence me. But so does James Herron, and like their stuff is so totally different, right? So I'm still kind of, I think, figuring out exactly where my, I guess if I could call it a style, sort of fits in this world.
Very good. Good stuff. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So we're here talking about your latest project, Chetwynd. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about it, maybe talk about the origins as well.
Okay, so about 5 years ago, I teach in this post-secondary system here in Halifax, and I was on a sabbatical, and the sabbatical was kind of like I teach in the community college system, so it's they like us to be in touch with industry. So I went back as a freelancer. I teach graphic design and illustration, and so I was. Went back and I was doing, some illustration work and just, kind of dabbling at it a little bit, but it really had been the first time I'd actually drawn something in quite a while. So it kind of started with Inktober.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did Inktober, 1 October, and it was like, it was really hard, get a drawing done every single day and post it, and I was like just driven to do that. So I did the first one, and then something about that process just kickstarted my illustration, I guess, interests again. And when you're doing Inktober, the nice thing about it is that you really don't have a lot of time to think about stuff, right? So it's like, okay, just get it done. It's finished. It's not perfect. And that mantra kind of stuck with me. And so from around, I guess maybe, was it the last? I think it was the last, not the last Inktober, but the one before that. Actually, it might have been the one before that. I started doodling this. Like you can't really edit yourself, right? So it's like, okay, I have an idea. I'm going to do it right now, get it done, and then I'm going to, I don't know, get groceries or whatever it is. and so I did this ridiculous idea of a vampiric Sasquatch.
Okay, right.
And it just, I don't know, for some, and then I started fooling with names like Blood Squatch and Squatchula, and it's just ridiculous. And it sort of stayed with Vamp Squatch. And I for some dumb reason, I kept this idea kept coming back, like this, this gigantic vampiric Sasquatch. I blame my like late 1970s television for my interest in Bigfoot, which is like it's obviously still there. Anyway, so. He turned into a thing, and it was this sort of character that I really found interesting and kind of funny. And then all of a sudden I had kind of the sort of prickling, sort of story ideas around it. And I had done some small, like, 4-panel kind of things for Inktober, and, just and frankly, just to sort of stretch out Inktober. So, you do a panel, and then, the next day I can do another panel. So I don't have to come up with a new idea. And it turned into this story, and so I just started building it, and now I'm finished number 2. So the story is, I guess if I could talk about that, it's about a young teenage girl who has this weird connection to a protector who happens to be a 400-pound, 8-foot tall vampiric Sasquatch. Gosh, it's every time I say it, it just sounds so stupid. but
it's unique, though. That's for sure. Very intriguing story. Yeah.
It's fun anyway, and that's if at least, like, I'm still liking it, and I still like drawing him. So
that's important. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wanted to switch gears just a wee bit and maybe talk about the tools that you use to create your story and your art. Maybe you can walk me through the process.
Sure. Unfortunately, one of the things I really like to do is draw in coffee shops and bars, and things are closed up tight here right now. So right now I'm I'm writing something else right now. But what I tend to work pretty traditionally at first. So I have a tiny little sort of 6x9 sketchbook. And I work kind of strangely in that I do very, very tight thumbnails. So they're really thumbnail size. This is from my my history in advertising and in graphic design, where you thumbnail everything, right? And I can't really do anything without some sort of little thumbnail. So I started doing these little thumbnails, and my drawings got tighter and tighter and smaller. So I use a mechanical pencil and one of those what are they called? It's a micro. Oh, it's a mono zero eraser. It's this tiny little eraser. So my thumbnails are super tight, but like maybe an inch by an inch and a half.
Wow.
And then I take a photo of that with my iPad or my phone, and then I tend to work in all my inking and coloring and lettering is done on an iPad. So I use Procreate pretty much extensively. I love that program, and I use Affinity Designer to do my lettering just because it works on an iPad, and then I put everything together in InDesign because, again, graphic design, I have to use InDesign, or else somebody will slap me or sue me or something.
Sure. Right. You mentioned that you are an educator. And I presume that in this realm that you have some advice. So I know that we could probably be here all day, but I'm wondering if you have one major piece of advice for someone who wants to make their own comic book. What would you say to them?
Well, I know if I'm listening to your podcast, I know a lot of people say just do it, which is, a really, really good advice. But I think more than that is to make it a habit.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what Inktober really taught me was, I can't thank Parker enough for that, because it was just such a fantastic thing to get me going. And it was, just do something every day. And if you work at it every day, it'll get done. And it might take a long time, but if you work at it every day, it'll get done. And like I mentioned this mantra that I use, finished, not perfect. And I say it to my students all the time. You can't do perfect. So finished is really good. But making it a habit, I think that's the one, if I had to pick one thing, that's the one thing I would recommend that people do. It's helped me for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's next for you? You're still working on Chetwynd. You mentioned an idea. I wonder if you could talk about that, or what else is going on.
Sure. I'm putting Chetwynd on the. By the way, Chetwynd is a real place. I wanted to pick a spot that was in the British Columbian interior, Sasquatch kind of, and it had a kind of a. It's spelled an interesting way. It's Chetwynd. It sounds like a Western metal band or something. And it just struck me. It's like, that's an odd name for a town. And so I set everything there. But I'm going to put Chetwynd on the shelf for just a little bit, because I have this other idea that is Halifax based, called The Narrows. And it centers around the Halifax explosion.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And without giving too much away, it's like what really caused it. That's kind of the idea, okay. A little bit. Yeah. And part of my reasoning for that is that I'm actually from a small town outside Ottawa. I've lived here for 30 years, but I love Halifax. It's a really interesting little city. And we're going through those, crazy growth pains that, every other city has gone through maybe 40 years ago. So you have this really weird mixture of old Victorian house next to giant brand new obelisk of a building, right? That's happening all over the city. So it's a really interesting place to look at. And I've been, wandering around taking photos of it forever. So I'm I really just want to draw Halifax. So Halifax is kind of one of the characters in the new story.
Ah, very good. Good stuff. So curious to know, you mentioned Chetwynd, where people can buy your work. Do you have a site people can go to?
Yeah. You can go to cheapocomics.com. That's comics spelled with an X. And I just, I just set this up recently because I did an Indiegogo thing for the first issue, but didn't feel like I wanted to rap on people's doors the same way for the second issue. So I put together a little website, and that's where you can get all my stuff there. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as well. There's all those things. You gotta be part of everything nowadays.
Thanks to Rob for the chat. You can discover more about Rob on Twitter and Instagram at SpiderRobbie, and online at spiderrobbie.com and cheapocomics.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2021.